I would like to call the meeting of the Virginia Waste Management Board to order. I am Amarjit Riyat, Chair of the Virginia Waste Management Board. At this time, I would like for other board members to introduce themselves. And thank you. Also on the dais is Michael Rolbent. He is the Director DEQ and our Department of Environmental Quality, and our legal counsel from the Attorney General's Office, Catherine Kohlbach. And before we begin, I want to remind everybody that this regular business meeting of the board and conduct that interferes with an orderly and efficient meeting or interferes with the rights of others to speak to the board is prohibited. Now we'll proceed with the agenda for the day. And let's see. Yes, the board members can introduce themselves also before we start with the agenda. Yes.
I'm Kim Hines. Kim Hines.
Michael Benedetto, TFC Recycling.
Jenny Johnson, Labella Associates.
Eric DeGroff, Regent University School of Law.
Dan Cheslow with Republic Services.
Good morning, Susan Seward, Seward Consulting.
Mike Rolban, Director DEQ.
Keith Clark with the Virginia Office of the Attorney General.
Thank you, everybody, for their introduction. And let's start review and approve the minutes of the October 23rd meeting. And anybody has any questions or clarifications, please come forward. All right. Can I have a resolution?
Mr. Chairman, I
Mr.
Chairman, I motion to approve the minutes as written.
Second, please.
Second.
Thank you all. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Minutes are approved unanimously. Now we'll go to the proposed regulations. Implementation of Chapter 235 of the 2024 Acts of the Assembly, SB 342, Solid Waste Management Regulations, 9 VAC 2081. Rath.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. My name is Rebecca Rath. I am the Regulatory Analyst with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, Division of Land Protection and Revitalization. Today, I will be presenting to you the proposed action titled Amendment in Response to Chapter 235 of the 2024 Virginia Acts of Assembly. This action would amend the Virginia Solid Waste Management Regulations under 9 VAC 2081. Chapter 235 of the 2024 Acts of Assembly, previously titled Senate Bill 342, directed the Virginia Waste Management Board to amend the Virginia Solid Waste Management Regulations to allow for vegetative waste to be transported to another location for open burning if it is impractical or unsafe to destroy such waste on the premises of private property. Chapter 235 of the Acts of Assembly 2024 session was approved on March 28, 2024. Section 10.1-140211 of the Code of Virginia authorizes the Virginia Waste Management Board to promulgate and enforce regulations. Chapter 235 of the Acts of Assembly 2024 session was approved on March 28, 2024. The NOIRA to amend the Virginia Solid Waste Management Regulations was published on October 21, 2024. A 30-day public comment period ended on November 20th, 2024, and no comments were received during the comment period time. As part of the regulatory development process, DEQ convened a regulatory advisory panel, or RAP. The RAP member list was finalized on December 18th, 2024, and the RAP met on February 6th, 2025. 5 of the selected 7 RAP members were in attendance at this meeting, and the RAP provided DEQ with feedback in the development of the regulatory language. DEQ's solid waste, air, prep, and enforcement staff were also in attendance at the meeting in order to provide insight on current regulations and share recent details about open burning compliance and enforcement activities. This regulatory amendment is only applicable to vegetative waste. Vegetative waste is already defined under the Virginia Solid Waste Management Regulations. The full definition can be seen on the slide here, but it includes such materials as yard trimming, brush, and leaves. Open burning of vegetative waste is currently allowed under the Virginia Solid Waste Management Regulations, but only at the site of generation or at a permitted solid waste landfill. Both solid waste management and air regulations govern open burning activities. However, the air open burning regulations specifically limit many of their restrictions to VOC emission control areas, which are shown here on this map. These are areas with recognized air pollution issues, and therefore open burning is more limited there than in other areas of the state. Federal regulations allow for the infrequent burning of vegetative waste without considering a property to be an open dump. DEQ's regulations and current open burning exemptions were developed with this in mind. DEQ consulted multiple resources in order to craft this exemption and discussed these resources with the Regulatory Advisory Panel in order to draft the proposed language for off-site burning per the legislation. The proposed language can be found in Attachment C of your board books. This proposed language would add a new subdivision under 9 VAC 2081-95D15H, which would outline the conditions of the proposed amendment. The full list of proposed conditions can be found in the board book attachment, but notably the proposed requirements include several setback criteria for the location of the potential burn event. These would include setbacks of 1,000 feet from any occupied building unless the occupant has given prior written permission, other than a building located on the property where the burning is conducted, 300 feet from any roadway or structure, 200 feet from potable water wells or other drinking water sources, 100 feet from any regularly flowing surface water, body, river, floodplain, or wetland, 50 feet from any property line, 50 feet from any utility lines or tree lines, and 50 feet from any potentially combustible material. I'll pause now for any questions.
I have one. Did you guys consult with the fire marshals from the state of Virginia?
Your microphone, please. Thank you.
You consulted with the fire marshal's office regarding the burning or any permits required for from the fire marshal before the opening burning is allowed?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Are there any additional questions?
Excuse me, yes. Again, this sort of, just to clarify, these setbacks are consistent with other regulations?
Yes, ma'am, and I would invite Priscilla Rohr with the solid waste team to come up and clarify those criteria for you.
Hi, I'm Priscilla Rohr, and I just can provide a little more context for where some of these conditions came from. The setbacks specifically, we borrowed from the State Air Control Board's air open burning regulations. They do already have an exemption in their regulations, which allows for centralized burning of vegetative waste. Specifically, we looked at the exemption that they have for VDOT to burn vegetative debris that they generate from highway maintenance activities, and so some of those are actually written into a best management practice document that DEQ approves. The air open burning regulations specify that there will be a BMP that VDOT follows, and so it seemed most similar to this, and so we were able to borrow not just the setbacks, but some of those other conditions.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
question for the group. Would you consider this to be similar to a transfer station, such as when solid waste is brought to a site and then placed there temporarily until it winds up at a landfill? That this would be similar to that?
In what context are you, as far as permitting aspect or just activity-wise? I mean, we weren't looking to permit this activity like we would a transfer station. And we were also, in the language of the regulation, we were also looking at it being specific to the generator. So in that aspect, no, a transfer station would receive from multiple generators, whereas this is really looking at the activity to occur per generator or per location, if that makes sense.
So you would not be able to open it up, something like this, to a community to allow multiple haulers to bring in their vegetative waste to a certain area until it winds up at its final destination?
We were not intending it to be used in that way, no. Like I said, it was more specific to the generator or per location, just to avoid frequent activity there and large scale, like you would have at a permitted location. And I don't know if anyone else has clarification. Right, yes. So some of the conditions would be prohibited to that, as far as there is a condition in the language that you could only burn every 60 days and only for a 72-hour period. So that in and of itself would make it difficult for a larger scale activity to occur. I don't know if there's anything. There are some other exemptions. There is another exemption in both the air and the waste reg for communities to open burn vegetative waste if it's part of a cleanup from a governor-declared state of emergency, though. So they might be able to take advantage, if that was the case, of that other exemption.
Mr. Chair, I believe it also limits the amount. I think it's 100 cubic yards is what it said in there, so I think that would preclude any commercial application.
Anybody else has any question? I have one more. Instead of burning, why won't we encourage everybody to grind it and recycle it and give us mulch instead of burning and causing a little bit of pollution to the air, and we can grind all the vegetative waste and people can pick up the mulch free of cost.
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, do we encourage
Do we encourage?
to recycle? And for recycling, you can grind all the vegetative waste and leave it here on site, and people will pick it up as mulch.
Sure, we appreciate that question. Catherine Perzik, Director of Land Protection Revitalization for the DEQ. This amendment was in response to legislation which clearly asked us to craft a regulation to allow for vegetative waste to be moved from one property where it's unsafe or impractical to burn it as part of a construction or development activity and be able to move it to somewhere else for the purpose of management open burning. This is an elective activity that there are certainly other framework of the regulation that allows for all the other options, like mulching is also exempt and does not require a solid waste permit, as well as small scale composting to larger scale composting, which would have a permit by rule. So in effect, this regulation is proposed because the statute, the legislation asked us to craft that regulation. Again, it is small scale in nature, but that doesn't preclude any other options of vegetative waste management.
Thank you.
Could I just add one thing, sir? Just the history, Senator Stewart introduced legislation, and that's all this is in response to, and it's because DEQ did a violation on someone that was not complying with this current requirement. So as Catherine said, it's just a very minuscule change for this one situation at his request in terms of he patroned the bill. And that came in response to a local county, and I'm trying to remember it's Westmoreland County or not. I think it's Westmoreland. So it's a very targeted issue.
Thank you, sir.
Sure.
All right.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I have one quick question, if I may. Could you, I looked through the material, could you remind me really quickly who was on the RAP? Which groups were on there?
Sure, so it is towards the back of your,
It is towards the back, okay.
which lists the regulatory advisory panel members. I do not recall.
We got it.
I'm
here.
sorry,
I think we found it.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
If you look at the next page, you'll see the legislation was a total of 3 lines. So,
Okay. All right.
If we don't have any more questions,
One
okay,
question. I'd just
go
like
ahead,
to
please.
confirm, none of the standards in this regulation are less stringent than any relevant standards at the federal level, is that right?
Right, at the federal level, they didn't really give us any guidelines other than infrequent burning, and this sort of fits a niche between no restriction and what we allow for our permitted solid waste management facilities. All right.
All right, thank you, Catherine. We don't have any questions, and can I have a resolution to adopt the resolutions?
Mr. Chair, if I may present the staff recommendation.
Oh, I did not see it. Okay, go ahead.
Staff recommends that the board approve the draft amendment proposed to the Virginia Solid Waste Management Regulations 9 VAC 208195 by the amendment in response to Chapter 235 of the 2024 Acts of Assembly as a proposed regulation and to proceed with public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to approve the regulation?
I move that we accept the recommendation of the department and approve the recommended regulation.
Anybody second?
I will second that recommendation.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 It's approved unanimously. Thank you all. Let's go to the next item. It's your division director's report. Catherine?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I will present to you a director's update, a little different than the standard fall one I do, giving you input on what's going on with all of our programs and focus mainly on 3 topics. One is to provide you guys an update on where we are with our solid waste infrastructure for recycling grant, otherwise known as the SWIFR grant. Give you guys an update on a few legislative impacts to the program, as well as status of our application for a CCR permitting program. Excuse me. So just to reorient, I've spoken about the solid waste infrastructure for recycling grant or SWIFR grant. This was first-time funding from EPA provided to states specifically to improve post-consumer materials management programs. We had options of types of projects to propose to EPA for this grant funding, and the DEQ's projects include developing a statewide solid waste management plan, as well as developing a recycling data and collection and analysis application. EPA provided this funding to states as part of their 50% by 2030 recycling rate goal across the U.S., and Virginia's current statewide recycling rate is 42.5% based on the, I think, calendar year 2023 recycling data. So as you may be aware, Virginia's current solid waste management plan is from 1979. It was developed at a time when original RCRA, or the Resource Conservation Recovery Act of 1976, was encouraging states to develop guidelines for solid waste management, and that is what the focus of Virginia's 1979 plan was. However, shortly following the late 1970s, EPA and DEQ's focus turned towards program authorization, so ensuring that states could implement Subtitle D, or solid waste management for municipal waste landfills programs. And so in lieu of state solid waste management planning efforts, Virginia has largely relied on local and regional solid waste management plans to indicate that Virginia has prepared for solid waste management. So our first project with our Swiffer grant funding is the development of a statewide solid waste management plan focusing on advancing post-consumer materials management. We're also looking towards progress in Virginia towards EPA's national recycling and food loss and waste reduction goals, again, that 50% by 2030, as well as reflecting the current needs of the industry and serving as a roadmap for the future in Virginia. Our proposed planning period would be from 2026 through 2046, again, a 20-year planning period similar to what our localities and regional solid waste management plans cover. The timeline for this plan development includes last fall, we awarded a contract to Resource Recycling Systems to prepare a statewide solid waste management plan using the Swiffer grant funds. Like I mentioned, our only plan was published in 1979, and again, it was focused on closing open dumps and aligning Virginia solid waste management regulations with the federal Subtitle D program. Since then, like I mentioned, we've relied on local and regional plans. So we essentially have this timeline as presented here to attempt to get a final solid waste management plan developed by the end of 2025. Where we currently are is between tasks 2 and 3, which includes a baseline assessment and facilitation and drafting a plan outline. For the baseline assessment, what RRS did was look to past reports that have been developed with DEQ input and or outside stakeholder groups. So you may recall DEQ had done a waste diversion and recycling task force that had provided recommendations to the General Assembly about all things recycling, waste diversion, and similar topics, as well as there was a Plastics Advisory Council that had produced reports. And DEQ, through a different grant funding, through the AIR program on climate pollution reduction grants, had developed a climate action plan. So these were all sort of background documents that RRS looked at. They're also considering our current information as far as our current statutes and regulations, looking at mapping of facilities and where our infrastructure for solid waste management is and other available data, and presenting us a gap analysis looking at policy, financial, and technical needs, as well as looking at neighboring state solid waste management plans and other statutes and regulations to help provide information to the state. As far as facilitation goes, we held a stakeholder input session with RRS back on March 4th. We had stakeholders representing Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Charlottesville areas attend, along with a few industry folks. The discussion during that facilitated session centered on the opportunity this plan provides, as the 1979 plan is its purpose to, at the time, to transition Virginia's program is severely outdated, and talked about the plans needing to focus on preserving Virginia's landfill capacity and identifies ways to encourage waste reduction and reuse and recycling, to your point earlier, Mr. Riat. Recycling and resource recovery in line with the current waste management hierarchy, which is already in our current regulations. As far as developing the solid waste management plan, I was hoping to present you guys the outline today. We do have a draft outline from RRS, but we do not quite have it finalized with our input back. But I also wanted to just alert those of you to the board that this plan will come to the board for your review and input and approval ultimately. And we're looking at that towards the latter half of this year. I did make that circle sort of go beyond task 6 with RRS, because we certainly, if we have input and need to change that plan and amend with your input, I foresee it possibly extending out further. Let's see if I had any notes here. Yeah. So we'll continue to move forward on that project and bring you guys more updates in the future. Our second project is a recycling data collection and analysis tool for local governments. They currently present DEQ a spreadsheet with the information about the recyclable materials that are collected and managed within their locality. And we take those Excel spreadsheets and manually create a master spreadsheet that then creates that statewide recycling rate that I spoke of to 42.5%. So our goal is to develop an online tool that local governments would input their data through our MyDEQ portal. This is similar to how local litter recycling grant applications are submitted, as well as the solid waste information and assessment that landfills and other permitted facilities do. So we have engaged external resources to develop that tool so that we can use that in the future. All right. The next item I wanted to touch on was just some legislative impacts. So I just want to remind folks, House Bill 1379 from 2024 changed some of the reporting deadlines for some of the reports that the DEQ establishes or publishes on an annual basis. The ones that the land program manages include the toxics release inventory and the solid waste information and assessment report. Those previously had in different deadlines, and they will now be due in a consolidated report on October 1st. So all of the SWIA information that we're collecting now from facilities will be published later this year. And then similarly, we do a report every 2 years on our permit fee programs and evaluations of permits issued. And that also will be October 1st. The full list of reports there on your slide is all the reports that will be within that consolidated report. I also wanted to touch on from this General Assembly session, there was a House Resolution number 448 from Delegate Krizik that was titled as a litter tax study, but really has 3 components for the agency to look at using a study group. The first being solid waste and sort of analyzing our current waste streams as well as costs and revenues for such solid waste disposal programs in the state, looking at conducting an analysis of our recycling streams, as well as market conditions and other opportunities to increase recycling, as well as economic opportunities for our recycling systems. And then finally, the third component is a litter tax element, looking at the current efficacy of the litter tax program, considering whether an additional litter tax for cigarette litter is appropriate, as well as whether there should be litter tax exemptions for small businesses. The language within this resolution includes the agency, again, creating a group to look at this information and producing annual reports by the first day of the next 2 General Assembly sessions. So we are still working on our implementation plan for this report, or reports, plural, to move forward with this study. And then finally, I wanted to touch on the expanded polystyrene food service containers. There's been a lot of jumping around of the implementation date in recent years due to budget language. Right now, we are moving forward with the implementation dates as July 1 of 2025 for chain restaurants and July 1, 2026 for all other vendors. There is a component of this bill that allows localities to grant exemptions to food vendors due to economic hardship. And the current budget, which isn't resolved, still has this in question, which is why I have that or date there. But right now, we're moving forward as if 25 and 26, but that could change. And then we had previously updated our litter grant guidelines to allow for a 5% allocation on public information campaigns, and localities have been able to get additional funding to their litter grants for any expanded polystyrene work. And then finally, I just wanted to touch briefly on our CCR permit program. Many of you are probably aware, since I've been talking about CCR, I think every time I've come to this board, that we have incorporated the federal coal combustion residuals language into our solid waste regs, and we did that last fall with the final update to align our regulations with December 2020. But separately, we have had legislative mandates that have sort of dictated how certain facilities within the state will close, and that is what is depicted on the graph, with facilities that are required to close by removal in blue. There was a secondary closure by removal for the western part of the state later that year, and then one that doesn't have a legislative mandate with Clover, but still is aligned with the CCR federal rule. We've heard some news recently from EPA regarding state permit programs, and they're really moving towards making sure state permit programs get reviewed and approved in a timely manner. and they're providing additional guidance on what states need to do in order to prove their programs, especially for states who have already been doing permitting activities. As we've been doing permitted activities since 2015, when the original rulemaking for CCR was self-implementing, and certainly Virginia has passed legislation, so we have been trying to craft and issue permits for these facilities that align both with federal requirements as well as state requirements in order to get these facilities to safe closure. And our submittal is prepared. We're on the cusp of submitting that to EPA. It essentially is a transmittal letter, a description of our permitting, compliance, enforcement activities and authorities, a legal certification indicating that we have authorities under our statutes and regulations, copies of all our regulations, and a checklist that essentially shows that we've incorporated by reference the majority of the federal rule into Virginia's regulations. And with that, I'll pause for questions.
Anybody has any questions for Catherine, please?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, to Director Persick, just to share a couple of comments. First, I would like to share that the recycling equipment tax credit is very important for our industry, and TFC, our company, did receive a $500,000 grant from the Food Packaging Institute to begin promoting the recycling of paper cups. So we're happy to see paper cups being used here in the effort to decrease the expanded polystyrene. Another item I would love to share is that we ordered equipment back in the fall of 2024. It arrived in the beginning of April, and we got hit with a 25% tariff on that equipment coming from overseas. All of our equipment is coming from overseas, so efforts that continue to promote recycling would be very much appreciated. And then one other item to share with you is we could have a perceived bias, but there is an agency called the Southeastern Public Service Authority in the Hampton Roads area that is promoting a single cart solution for recycling. And their plan, from my understanding, is to eliminate curbside recycling, throw everything into one cart. My understanding of the process is it gets shredded, and a lot of that organic material, which includes paper, would be turned into a biochar, and they're planning to try and recycle that. It would be the first system, of my understanding, in the United States that would try and do that with MSW instead of wood waste. And I wanted to make the agency aware of that. The recycling industry and the paper recycling industry is very vibrant in the state of Virginia. There are a lot of paper mills that rely on that paper. And if a system like this does not recognize the full value of turning paper back into paper, but instead turning paper into a biochar that is not able to be turned back into paper, it could have some very detrimental effects on not only the recycling efforts that we've made over the years, but also on businesses that have invested billions of dollars. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else, please?
I have a question. Catherine, can you share any of the input that you got on the statewide solid waste plan from participants?
Sure.
Was there a common,
sort of hit the
common theme, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of there was a lot of confusion about what we're trying to do with the solid waste management plan. Certainly, this is sort of uncharted territory for all of us involved. I don't think anyone at the state was involved in this 1979 plan and the purpose of the 1979 plan versus what we're trying to do today. We are certainly trying to strike that balance of what does the state need. We've had a lot of conversations in recent years about landfill capacity and that 20-year number that we have always used as sort of a benchmark for demonstrating need for landfills. And so again, that conversation sort of stemmed around recognizing that, you know, we have a certain landfill universe now. We do get expansion and new landfill requests, albeit more rare. Certainly, we're more used to an expansion request than a new landfill. But both have come to the table in recent years, and what things the agency can do, whether it be through legislative proposals, which we don't have as much control over, but through legislative proposals or regulatory changes or policy changes sort of can we make sure we're preserving that, but then moving the state forward and looking at those recycling rates. I think we recognize there's a disparity in how much is recycled and what's collected and what's available across the state, so sort of trying to get more of those voices. Like I mentioned, we only had Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Charlottesville at the meeting, so we certainly recognize there was a portion of the state that we didn't get feedback during that public meeting, and we're continuing to sort of solicit input, but really trying to recognize where the state is and where can the state go forward in solid waste management.
Sorry. Thank you. Is the process, once you're in final draft form, does it have to go before the General Assembly to approve, or?
My understanding is that RRS will develop a draft that we will go to another round of public comment on, and then we will bring that final draft to the Waste Board. And the Waste Board has final action on approving the board on the plan.
Okay, thank you.
I have one question, Catherine. Do we still have how many dumps in the state of Virginia, open dumps?
We do not have any open dumps to my.
We don't?
There had previously been legislation that had targeted, and I won't say they called them open dumps, but it was that unlined landfill universe. So those that have been, Virginia has had a permitting program since the early 1970s through the previous Department of Health. And there was that phased approach to closing landfills that had unlined areas and ensuring that all expansion areas were lined to current Subtitle D requirements and the state regulations. The deadline for closure and cease acceptance of waste for any previously unlined area was 2020. So most of those facilities have already closed or in the process of continuing to install final cover.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
Madam Director, is the solid waste management plan going to look at things like hard to dispose, hard to recycle items like tires, things like that? I know there's been some legislation proposed, concerns about those things. And are we looking at that?
I believe everything was on the table as far as what we were looking at, and certainly anything that we've already had input on from past efforts, which have also included tires, is stuff that we're looking at, yes.
Anybody else has any question for Ms. Pizarnik? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good presentation. All right. Let's see. Public forum. Do we have anybody signed up?
Mr. Chair, we have no one signed up to speak at this point.
Thank you. Let's talk about future meetings.
At this point, there's no future meeting scheduled.
All right. Thank you all. Then I am asking for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. All in favor? Let's adjourn. Adjourn the meeting. Thank you all. Everybody has hopefully a good weekend. Thank you so much. And safe drive back.
The Senate of Virginia, Richmond.